Hey everyone, I'm Janet B. Recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. And tonight I am going to talk about one of the two co-founders of AA, Bill Wilson, Bill's story. So when I went through Bill's story, I found 10 things that Bill tried that didn't work and then found what ultimately did. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the illness stuff because I want to get to the good stuff, of course, the miracle part. So if you have your big book, Bill's story opens on page 1 of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and he talks about going to war. And he says, I was part of life at last. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. And later on, he says, I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. I was lonely and again turned to alcohol. So here's a couple of things that didn't help him. First, changing circumstances. Things were really bad, and that's when he turned to alcohol. He was lonely. And then he said, I was part of life. It was hilarious, exciting, and I discovered alcohol. So if we think changing our circumstances is going to help us recover, it probably won't. Imagine someone with cancer saying, I think I'll move from New York to Los Angeles. That will make my cancer cells stop multiplying. Of course, it doesn't. We take our illness with us, unfortunately. Um, the second thing he says is, I forgot the strong warnings I heard from people. I mean, we were all taught to look both ways before we cross the street and taught if you don't, a truck hits you, you're roadkill. We remember that, right? We look both ways before we cross the street. Or if the doctor says you have pneumonia, make sure to take that penicillin twice a day. We're going to remember to do that. But something as important as alcohol and the dangers of it, how could Bill forget the warnings? And we've talked about this before, that in people like us, we remember that if we cross the street, we're going to be roadkill. We remember that if we don't take the antibiotics, our pneumonia will never go away. But we forget that if we have one, we won't be able to stop. And if you want some information detailed on how the bridge is broken in our brains between our memory and our conscious mind when it comes to food, shoot me a text and I'll send you a one-page sheet I put together on the broken bridge that talks about what it means for a compulsive eater to be powerless. Um, Remember, when Bill wanted to take that drink, that strong warning that alcohol is bad for you, it didn't make it into his conscious mind to stop him. Strong warnings of other people never did anything. So there's Bill. He goes to war. He comes back from war. He goes to law school. And what happens to him? He says, at one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Now, I went to law school, and in law school, most classes, 100% of your grade is based just how you do on that one final exam. So this is pretty important. So I would say the third thing that Bill tried that didn't work is necessity. Bill needed to be sober when he took those final exams, and he couldn't. Necessity doesn't help. I mean, who of us said, well, I want to lose weight so I can fit into that dress at the high school reunion, or I need to lose weight because my doctor told me my blood pressure is dangerously high. I'm miserable and I need to lose weight because I can't stand myself. It doesn't matter. It may help for the short term, but necessity doesn't work for people like us. So Bill finishes law school and says, the law is not for me. I like business. I was the same way, by the way. I went to business instead of a law firm. But anyway, there Bill goes. Life is really good for a while, and then what happens? The stock market crashes. Things get bad. He's okay for a while, though. Page 4, we hear him saying, I was determined to win again. And the next morning, I called a friend in Montreal and went to Canada. So again, he's trying the geographic. He's able to stop for short periods of time until page 5, where he says, liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. See, at some point, maybe we could have stopped. A lot of us can think back to a time where we could have stopped if we wanted to. I can't. By the age of age 4, I already crossed that line. But here's Bill. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. And once we cross that line where it's a necessity, we can't save ourselves anymore. We need to be rescued. It's like we're in quicksand or an undertow. We can't rescue ourselves anymore. For Bill, things got worse. He loses his house. I mean, that's pretty bad. But ever the optimist, he says, then I got this great business opportunity. Things are going to work. And he says, I went on a prodigious bender. I still have not looked up that word prodigious. I assume it means really bad. He went on a really bad bender, and that chance vanished. So here he is. What does he do? He says, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. So he knew his alcohol threshold was 0. He could not have even one drink. He said, I'm done. I had written lots of sweet promises before, but even my wife believed me. This time I meant business, and I did. So here's the fourth thing he tried: commitment, really meaning business. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't help. Think of our poor cancer patient whose cancer cells are multiplying. And he says, you know what? I'm really committed to have my cancer cells stop multiplying. Our hearts would break because we would know that no matter how sincere that person was, he couldn't do it. He doesn't have the power. Commitment alone won't do it because lack of commitment isn't our problem. Now, of course, we need commitment to work this program, but commitment alone won't do it. Our problem isn't lack of commitment, it's lack of power. So what happens to our poor friend Bill? He means business, but he keeps getting drunk. And he says, I began to wonder if I was crazy, bottom of page 5, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that, a lack of perspective. Thinking I can do things that time and time again, I should see that I can't do. I sometimes still think I have the knees of a 20-year-old, and I'll go to the gym and I'll do some like really heavy squats and leg presses. And I'll come home and I'll have to ice my knees and not work out that hard for a while because I'm not 25 and I can't work out like I'm 25. So sometimes I have a lack of perspective at the gym. Big deal. It's not dire. Rest my knees and I'm fine, but not with this illness. Because what happens? Page 6. One day he goes into a cafe to use a telephone. Okay, not really smart. It's like someone who's newly abstinent walking into a Haagen-Dazs to use the phone that's all the way at the back of the store. What happens? Bill gets drunk. But being a good addict, what does he tell himself? I'll manage better next time, but I may as well get good and drunk now. Number 5 is what I call the pillow cure. I can do whatever I want now because I'll be able to start tomorrow. 8 hours with my head on this magic pillow, and I'll suddenly have the power I didn't have before. So the pillow cure or the I'll start tomorrow syndrome doesn't work. So what happened the next day? Well, the magic pillow didn't work. And he says, the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. You know, normally remorse, horror, and hopelessness convince us we shouldn't do that thing again, right? A lot of us have probably had the experience of going to the beach, not putting on sunscreen because we wanted a really good tan. And then, like, to our horror, instead of that cute little tan, our skin is peeling off and our faces are bright red. So, what do? The next time we go to the beach? We just put on sunscreen because we don't want to go through that again. But for an alcoholic or a compulsive eater, remorse doesn't help. What's remorse? It's feeling strong guilt. Doesn't do it. Horror, looking at ourselves, gaining weight, or throwing up all the time doesn't do it. Feeling hopeless doesn't do it. The only time hopelessness is good is if at the moment someone is hopeless and they really get that they're hopeless, someone presents them with a solution. But plain old feeling hopeless and horrified, that usually just ends up with feeling self-pity. And as my friend Roxanne says, self-pity parties usually end with a cake. So for 2 more years, he goes on like this. He steals from his wife. He tries all sorts of things. He goes to a hospital, page 7. He says, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. That's a very strange expression. Like, did he have a goose that was like high on a pole? I think that means things were really well, that there was no goose flapping around in the room, literally. Bill says, I went to town regularly. I even made a little money. Surely this was the answer. Self-knowledge. So two things here. Bill had a desire, but desire without spiritual help doesn't work. Anyone with cancer has a desire for his or her cancer cells to stop multiplying. Desire alone doesn't work. And then he says, this was the answer, self-knowledge. Well, self-knowledge doesn't work. A person could know she had cancer. She could know exactly how she got it, which people generally don't. But let's say she lived near a toxic radiation waste site and she ended up with cancer. Okay, so what? She knows why she has it. It doesn't make it go away. Self-knowledge doesn't help. Page 8, we see again, along with remorse, horror, and hopelessness, now we've added to the mix loneliness, despair, and self-pity. And how does Bill describe his bottom? It's really sad. He says, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And he still didn't stop because here's number 9. A first step alone does nothing. I can admit I'm powerless over food and my life is unmanageable. That admission alone gets me nowhere, does nothing. It's like a doctor showing someone an MRI and saying, see, now this proves you have cancer. And the person says, okay, I admit I have cancer and I'm powerless over it. That alone does nothing. So number 10, Bill says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. And then he drank again. So number 10 is fear. So a doctor telling us that if we don't lose weight, we're going to have a heart attack, that doesn't do it. Some of y'all may have heard me say, I met a woman once at an OA convention. She was diabetic. Her doctor told her if she didn't stop eating compulsively and lose some weight, it would affect her eyes and her kidneys. When I met her, she had a seeing eye dog because she was blind and she was on dialysis waiting for a kidney transplant. Fear doesn't do it. And again, if we think back to cancer, if someone says to a cancer patient, you know, if you don't make your cancer cells stop multiplying, you're going to die. I mean, who would ever say, oh, I'm glad you gave me that information. Now I'm really scared. Okay, now I'll make my cancer cells stop multiplying. That never happens because fear doesn't do it. Fear isn't from God, doesn't help. So here's poor Bill. He's tried everything. And he says, everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. But then look at the turn of the story. He says, how dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch, my last binge. I was soon to be catapulted. I love that word, like catapulted. Not I took myself. I was catapulted. I was rescued. He says, I was catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. And I think of like the Wizard of Oz when it goes from black and white to color. Life becomes in color when we work this program. So before that, top of the page, he had loneliness, despair, and self-pity. And what does he get now? He says happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Because just like this illness is progressive, recovery is progressive. So once we get into recovery and start living this way of life, it just keeps getting better and better. So let's find out how it happened, how God launched his search and rescue mission for Bill Wilson. It's November. Bill's drinking in his kitchen alone, and he's thinking, how am I going to keep drinking? and the phone rings. It's an old friend he used to drink with. His friend says, "Hey, Bill, can I come over?" Now, Bill was in New York at the time. His friend didn't live in New York. It had been years since his friend Ebby had come to New York. But Ebby just happened, I say with air quotes, just happened to be in New York. And he just happened to call Bill and say, "Hey, Bill, can I come over?" And Bill's like, "Sure." He didn't care about Ebby or Ebby's well-being. He just thought we could drink together. This is great. I don't have to drink all by myself anymore. It's an oasis. This is wonderful. So remember, he's drinking and planning on drinking more when Ebby comes over. And Ebby didn't knock on his door, by the way, and say, "Bill, you're drinking. I'll come back when you have a certain amount of hours sober." And by the way, Bill didn't do that to Dr. Bob either. Dr. Bob was drunk and planning on staying drunk. So Ebby went in, talked to Bill, looked at him, and Bill said, "There's something different." He invited him in. He pushed a drink across the table, said, "Here, have a drink." And Ebby said, "No." And Bill says, "What got into him? He wasn't himself. He didn't look like himself. He didn't act like himself." And I think, but of course not. A butterfly doesn't look like a caterpillar anymore. Ebby had been transformed. This is so important to me, and I hope I can convey this. God isn't in the fix it up a little business. God is in the transformation business. He is in the caterpillar to butterfly stuff. So Bill says, "Okay, what's going on?" And Ebby just says, "I got religion. No sugarcoating God, no dummying it down." I have heard people say, "Oh, I say, higher power so I don't offend anyone." I'm like, "Is that what you call God?" "No, I call God God, but I don't want to offend anyone." If you call God God, call God God. It's okay. We don't have to sugarcoat God. The founders of this program didn't. He said, "I've got religion." But let's be clear what the definition of religion is. It's the belief in and the worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. So when we say God as I understand him, it's not doorknob as I understand him, or light bulb as I understand him, or group as I understand him, because the definition is the belief in a, and the worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. Now, I might conceive of God differently than you conceive of God, but I think we can all agree a light bulb and even a group is not a superhuman controlling power that can be personal to us. And by the way, if you have trouble with this and believing in God, all I can say is you haven't met the God that I've met, that a lot of us have met. And me and plenty of people are here and available to help. Okay, aside over. Ebby didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't dummy it down so that it would appeal to Bill. And he didn't give God like some pet name. He just said, "I've got religion." And Bill's reaction was, Bill said, "I was aghast." So sometimes people are going to be aghast, like, "What? What's going on? Like, what the heck?" He was an alcoholic crackpot. Now he's a religious crackpot. And Bill said, "Whatever, let him rant. My gin's going to last longer than his words." Ebby didn't care what Bill was going to think of him. But Ebby didn't rant. He just quietly said he'd been drunk, so drunk he was about to be committed for alcoholism, and two men had appeared in court and persuaded the judge to suspend the commitment. One of the men who persuaded the judge was a recovered alcoholic, and the judge, here come my air quotes again, just happened to be his uncle. And they said, "Judge," or "Uncle, give us a little time. We know we can help him." It's a combination of two things. A simple religious action, there's that word. Imagine they use that word in court. A simple religious action, again, it's no more or no less than the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God, and a practical program of action. Clean house, clean up our past, help others. That was just 2 months ago, and the results were self-evident. It worked. 2 months. So I know in some program they say you can't sponsor till you've been abstinent this number of days, weeks, years, whatever. Anyone who's sitting here by, what's the next holiday? By Halloween or even sooner, you can be recovered and helping others. And if you're recovered and helping others on Halloween, you won't be interested in the candy. So, um, back then, they didn't put a time requirement on it. They just thought, have you gone through the steps? They didn't have the 12 steps at the beginning in the Oxford group. They had 6 steps. But have you gone through the basic process of surrendering your life to God, cleaning up the wreckage of your past, committing to help others, and living a life of prayer, meditation, and service? And it worked. These two guys helped Ebby. So fast forward only 60 days, and here's Ebby thinking, who can I help? I mean, he comes to New York. New York has Broadway, for crying out loud. Like, I think the greatest thing on the planet. And Ebby doesn't say, like, is Cats still playing at the Winter Garden? He said, who can I help? He's in New York on business. He says, let me call Bill. So again, anyone who's binging now, by Halloween, you can be carrying this message. You can be the butterfly someone's looking at. So Bill reports Ebby came to pass his experience on to me if I cared to have it. And he said, I was shocked. So see, it's not always necessarily a bad thing to shock someone. He said, I was shocked, but I was interested. And here's why. He says, certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So someone comes around and they don't feel hopeless, they're probably not going to be interested because this program is a lot of work. But when someone is hopeless, we want them to feel hopeless. We don't want to tell people, oh, don't worry, it'll get better. You know what? It doesn't get better. I was going to meetings for 6.5 years. When I first started, I wasn't throwing up at all. 6.5 years into OA, just coming, I was throwing up 6 times a day and needed major surgery on my esophagus. Just going to meetings and hearing information alone didn't do it. No one becomes a doctor by just sitting in classes. They have to go and like do a residency, an internship. They have to do certain things to become a doctor. So here's Bill, and Ebby's talking to him about God, and Bill said, I'd always believed in a power greater than myself. I often pondered these things. I wasn't agnostic, but when it came to a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut. So he believed in God, but not in a personal God. So he was what I would call a practical agnostic. That's how I was. I believed in God. It made no difference in my life. It's like I believe there's a king in England. Makes no difference to my life. I mean, I guess if I move to Britain, it might make a difference. Doesn't matter that I exist. I was like Bill. I believed in God, but I really didn't care about what he thought, if he had anything to say to me, if he had a will for me. I didn't think he would have anything to say to me. So here's Bill's same position. But how did Ebby describe God to Bill? Love, superhuman strength, and direction. We need all of this, right? Like a God who's love, superhuman strength, and direction. That's a God I can be interested in. So then Bill talks about the role that religion had played in his life. And he says, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. And isn't that how a lot of us use religion or the 12 steps? We'll do the parts that are convenient and not too hard. And I don't really need to do the rest. That's for those other people who are different than me. So Bill had to start doing some soul searching. He was saying, okay, I want to believe in God, but there's some things that got in his way. Legitimate things he had to deal with, as some of us do. Remember, he'd been to war. So he said, the war, the burnings. I mean, think about that. Burnings. Like, did he see whole towns burnt down? He said, these things made me sick. And judging from what I'd seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss. So Bill had witnessed a lot of calamity and he was stuck. Like, why all this suffering? And it seemed like he earnestly questioned it. And what did Ebby do? Well, he didn't do what I probably would have done and get into this whole like big theological debate about, well, does God cause suffering or does he just allow it and blah, blah, blah. And Ebby's way smarter than I am. He just basically said something like, Bill, I don't know. All I know is God is good. And when I surrendered my life to him, the obsession to drink was just taken out of me. And I guess that's how we can all deal with certain things. Like, I don't know why God allows human trafficking. That really breaks my heart. Like, why doesn't God smite all the traffickers with a plague of boils? I don't know. Why did my dad suffer with Parkinson's? And then after my mom like nursed him until his death, she got stricken with Alzheimer's. I don't know. And I have to be content this side of heaven with not knowing. God's got a plan, and it's okay if I don't understand it. All I need to know is He's good, and that if I surrender my life to Him, I don't have to eat compulsively anymore. So, what does Ebby do? He simply tells Bill God did for him what he couldn't do for himself. He said, I had admitted defeat. So, after admitting defeat, Ebby says, I'd basically been raised from the dead. Like, I know that was me in this illness, like a walking dead person. And Ebby said he was suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Like he was rescued. He was rescued from the scrap heap to a life of meaning. And he says, has this power originated in me? And he said, obviously it hadn't. On page 55, my favorite line in the book, it says, deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. We have the idea of God inside us, but like we're not God. God is a separate entity, they're saying. And he said, I had no power, but there was a power I was able to access. And that's all I need. I don't need to generate electricity myself. I just need to know how to access it. And because he knows he's hopeless, Bill is open minded. And he says, maybe these people are right after all. Effie isn't the same Ebby. And he says, I love this line, my ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. Great tidings just means good news. When we think of miracles, we think of things like Moses parting the Red Sea and, things we learned in Sunday school. And Bill saying, yeah, that's all well and good in the past, great for Sunday school, but here's a miracle at my kitchen table. A man who was once a caterpillar and he's now a butterfly. That's a miracle I can be interested in. He saw that Ebby was totally different. Page 12, he says his roots grasped a new soil. It's like he had a root transplant. He had become a different person. But he's still not sure. He's a little prickly, and his friend says, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And he says, that did it. All I had to do was be willing. Nothing more was required of me to make a beginning. So willing to believe there's a God. Okay, what does that mean in practical terms? How can I be willing to believe? And I think we can do something like this. We always want to be honest. We don't want to like pray dishonestly. So we can say, God, I don't know if you exist. And if you do exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, I really need some help. And in the meantime, I'm going to live my life the way I think you would want me to if you existed. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to help others. I'm going to hope and pray that you're real. And if you are, please help me. I mean, how could God resist a prayer like that, right? Willingness. We can be willing to believe that there's a God who can restore us to sanity. If I was convinced God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough, like enough to do the work, not just sit there and say, God, okay, I'm willing to believe you exist. Now come out of your bottle and grant my 3 wishes and then go back and leave me alone. No, we have to be willing to do the work. And how does Bill describe it? He says, at long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. He says, before blind I had been. Scales of pride and prejudice. that was blocking him from seeing God. So if we don't believe in God, maybe we need to look, do we have pride and prejudice? What's pride? Thinking too much of myself or thinking of myself too much. And what's prejudice? Thinking too little of others and thinking of others too little. He says, yeah, when I was younger, I needed and wanted God, and he came. I sensed his presence, but it was blotted out by worldly clamors. So if we want to blot God out, that's all we have to do. Become too concerned with things, our clothes, our jobs, worldly clamors, instead of spending time with our loving creator and helping some of his other kids. So then Bill went to the hospital because he showed signs of delirium tremors. That's why he went to the hospital. It was physically dangerous for him to withdraw without medical help. And he says, right there in the hospital, I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. See, so he didn't understand God much, but he said, God, just, I don't know you much, but do with me whatever you want. Like, what a beautiful prayer. It says, I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. So it's like, God, I believe you're good, or at least you can't mess up my life any more than I've messed it up. Take all of me, not just my food, take my relationships, my job, everything. I place myself 100% under your care and direction. And then what'd he do? He cleared away the wreckage of his past. And look how he describes it. He says, I ruthlessly faced my sins. He recovered in the Oxford group. They call them sins. In the big book, they're called character defects. Same thing. He said, I ruthlessly faced them. He was hard on himself. Being hard on ourselves gets a bad rap these days. Like our therapists are saying, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. And then sometimes we'll say, oh, I have the defect of perfectionism. Sometimes we'll call someone with a 10-step and say, oh, it was my perfectionism why I did that. It's a subtle way of manipulating someone else to say, don't be so hard on yourself. But he says, I ruthlessly faced everything. It's okay for me to be hard on myself because I know that God's got my back, that God cares about me. And once I ruthlessly face these things and I go to God, then I'm good. I'm right with God. There doesn't have to be any guilt or shame, but we have to be ruthless in facing these things. And he says, once he did that and he made his amends, that's it. He didn't drink anymore. And then he gives us some advice. He says, okay, we've got this new God consciousness within us. That's a promise of this program. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Common sense becomes uncommon sense. That's a result, that's a fruit of working this program. We intuitively know what to do, and it tells us how to handle doubt if we're unsure. We sit quietly, asking, that means praying, only for direction and strength to meet our problems and as God would have us. So when we're not sure what to do, we don't do what I sometimes do, which is pick up the phone and call a few people first. The right thing is to get quiet and ask God for strength and direction. And then Ebby tells him that when you do these things, you'll enter upon a new relationship with your creator and have the elements of a way of living which will answer all your problems. And I think that's really the mission statement of this book. Get a new relationship with your creator. And by working this program, we'll have the elements of a way of living which answer all our problems, our marriage problems, our work problems, our kid problems, our health problems, all my problems. This program teaches us how to deal with them. And so he tries to sum up what's necessary to recover. He says, belief in the power of God, not just the existence of God, but the power of God, plus willingness, honesty, and humility. These are the essential requirements. Now, if I just had willingness, honesty, and humility, and there was no God, I would just be doing self-improvement work. And I didn't have the power to improve myself. I didn't have the power to make it to work without stopping in the bakery between the subway stop and my office. I couldn't stop eating on my own. I couldn't stop being a mean, selfish person on my own either. But the book tells us it's simple, not easy, but it's simple. There's a price to be paid, and that's a destruction of self-centeredness. The root has to be destroyed. Remember when he saw Ebby, he said his roots grasped a new soil. It's like we have to be transplanted, like from the garden of self into God's garden, where there's a bunch of his other kids who we can serve. We need a root transplant. So Bill's still in the hospital and the thought comes. I love how he says it. The thought came. It's like God's directing his thoughts. The thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. Well, little did he know that shortly after this, about 6 months or so, wasn't real long, he was now in Ohio in business, just like Ebby had been to New York on business. He's in Ohio on business, and the thought came to fruition because there he freely gave to Dr. Bob and helped him, and they in turn helped alcoholic number 3, and on to us sitting on Zoom on a Monday night. And I want to highlight the bottom of page 14, I think one of the most critical paragraphs in the big book. It says, faith without works was dead, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic and the compulsive eater. For if the alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through, and if we were to fill in the blank, 2 things, I would have guessed prayer and meditation, but that's not what it says. It says we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. It says if we don't do that, we can't survive the certain trials and low spots ahead, and we would surely drink. Now, I don't like that it says that there's going to be certain trials and low spots ahead. I like to think I work this program and then it's like sunshine and puppy dogs from here on out. But they say, no, there's still going to be trials and low spots. But if you enlarge your spiritual life, you will make it through. If you don't, you're guaranteed to drink or to binge. Now, other people may be able to enlarge their spiritual life other ways. And believe me, I am not putting down prayer and meditation. I spend a good hour on it almost every day. It's essential for our spiritual lives. But we are people who grow spiritually through work and self-sacrifice for others. That's how our spiritual muscles grow. So Bill says, I did this work, but sometimes I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. So it doesn't mean once we do all this, we're going to be on cloud 9 all the time. We're still going to get resentful. We're still going to have self-pity, but we have a way to work through it. And he says, when all other measures fail, so he's done his review, he's looked for his part. He says, work with another alcoholic would save the day. It's a design for living that works in rough going. It's like, I guess there's certain types of cars. There's Fords and there's Chevys, and they're made a little differently, caused to run just a little bit differently. And for some reason, for us addicts, we're Chevys and we can't run on Ford parts. We just have to accept it. Helping others makes us feel better. It will make us feel amazingly lifted up and set on our feet. So he commences to tell us a few final things. He says, the joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. So they're telling us we can be happy even when things are hard. I mean, my son is getting deployed to the Middle East next month. I am happy anyway, and I do not go through my life in fear. I have a diagnosis of like diabetes and recently osteoporosis. I do what I have to. I do not live my life in fear. Bad situations, hard situations in my life do not define me. They do not dictate my happiness. Now, of course, I have a bad day and I have to work through them, but that's okay. This program gives us the tools to work through them. And they tell us there's scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. That's what's so beautiful about this fellowship. If we have a problem, there's probably somebody in this fellowship who has had that problem and has had success resolving it. And then there will be someone a little ways from now who will have that same problem, who you can help. Page 16, last page of the chapter. He says, an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature, but it's our job to love them anyway. That's the measure of how I'm doing spiritually. I can tell how rotten I'm doing when I look at someone who's still struggling and don't feel love for that person. That's when I realize I still have a long way to go in my spiritual development. And they say recovery is fun. Yes, we're in earnest, but it's fun. Like we shouldn't be coming to meetings with long faces. We come here, it's fun. And, I put my lipstick on because it's fun. And they say, but underneath it all, faith has to work 24 hours. And it tells us we don't have to look any further for utopia because we have it. Like, what's utopia? An ideal place. And he ends by saying, each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen when he was drinking, and Ebby came to visit him, when God sent Ebby to intervene. Bill says, each day my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. And whenever I talk about this chapter, I always end by saying that I think I personally and all of us are just very blessed and grateful to be part of that circle. And with that, I will pass.